Thanks, Maddie. Hi, everyone. I'm Abdel. I lead Elire SaaS Treasury practice, and I spent about 10 years at Kriba. So today is going to be about how APIs move Treasury from batch files to real time. We'll cover why APIs matter, integration methodology, two client stories, and simple takeaways. Valentin will also share an Oracle integration cloud example from SRNL for another perspective. Valentin, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Adele. Valentin Todoro. I'm an associate partner with Elire. I've got 17 years of consulting experience in the PeopleSoft and Fusion Cloud space, and I work on a lot of the boundary applications as well, including Apex, VBS, a lot of OIC as well. As Adele mentioned, we're going to go into some stories of SRNL and some lessons learned. And obviously nowadays with lots of AI, so injecting AI into the Fusion Studio, into OCI itself, and building agents around a lot of these capabilities. So Adele, take it back.
Thank you, Valentin. So here's a roadmap, why APIs for Treasury, Elire's integration methodology, integration patterns, and an example event flow, case studies. We're going to talk about El Paso Electric and Metro Nashville, OIC and SRNL with Valentin, API versus SFTP decision points, security, observability, and run-ops. We'll also discuss benefits and KPIs, and we'll close with takeaways and Q&A. So, why APIs for Treasury? So APIs shift us from scheduled files to real-time or near real-time. That means faster visibility with fewer manual touches and a clearer audit trail. So for Treasury, what does that mean? It means that we have improved cache positioning and forecasting signal. And a quick example and control would be for idempotency, duplicate requests don't create duplicate transactions. For example, if you receive multiple intraday files via API, they're not going to create duplicate transactions because you have that idempotency. That keeps the books clean and reduces risk. For this slide, I'll bring in Valentin for the Oracle Integration Cloud view. Valentin.
Thank you, Dale. Yeah, this is one tool. There's many integration tools out there, depending on obviously the systems you're using and how you're integrating them. But the one we've started to using quite a lot lately is Oracle Integration Cloud Services, OIC for short. And OIC, not to be confused with OCI, OIC does live as a service within Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. Okay, and this is an integration feature tool. RPA, business to business, effectively solution for your integrations. And this little quick slide right here kind of tries to paint that picture that within your OCI region, you will have, of course, your virtual cloud network layers. And within that, you will have any compute instances you might be running, databases, autonomous databases, Fusion applications. And behind all of those layers of firewall with the VCNs, you will also have this agent, the Oracle Integration Cloud Service. That agent would be responsible for communication with any number of applications, be them your on-premise PeopleSoft systems. And there is a means to integrate those as well using agents. So if you do have a system that is not just open, to the global internet, you're actually able to spin up agents on-premise and be able to interconnect integrations that way. So any kind of on-premise system you might be running, any kind of SaaS solution and system can also be interconnected with OIC. And you can, of course, have control over users, control over data. One huge thing that Abdel just mentioned is data and making sure that it doesn't get double entered into a system. OIC can help with a lot of that. A lot of your RPA capabilities are also now part of OIC. So if you're trying to make some quick automation tools, you can build them along with your integration. So if your integration needs certain data that there is no exposed APIs for, you can call RPAs within OIC to scrape data to perform actions against systems, along with normal integration flows using APIs. So I just wanted to showcase this one tool within our tool set.
Great, thank you, Valentin. So we'll come back to OIC and SRNL later for a deeper look. I'll hand over to Maddie to our first poll question.
All right, you should see up on your screen our first poll question. What is your current system integration or data exchange platform? SFTP, API, Swift, manual uploads, or other? We'll give folks a few seconds here to get their answers in. Like we have about 58 responses so far, with SFTP being the most popular with 55% of respondents. Second most popular is manual uploads at 15%, closely followed by APIs for 13.
Let's see. Yeah, this definitely helps us calibrate the level of detail. We often see a blend, right, of SFTP and APIs, and of course some manual transfers, which of course the manual processes, we want to get away from those automated processes. Thank you, Maddie. Okay, so for this next slide, I'm going to talk about how Elire delivers projects, right? So we deliver with consistency, right? We assess, we design, build, operate, and we standardize patterns, testing, and monitoring so teams move faster with less risk. And we keep an audit trail for audit readiness and control front and center. So project governance is very important for us, and we have a standard template that we use for projects. And with our experience, we've done many different projects, from payments to the full TMS migrations. So we always keep audit readiness and transfers front and center. Poll 2 question, Maddie, please.
You should see our second poll question up on your screen. How would you describe your organization's current use of APIs in Treasury or ERP? Currently using APIs, not currently using APIs, exploring our options. Like we've had about 50 responses so far. Maybe fairly even responses across the board. Currently using APIs is leading at 44%. Not currently using is following with 29%, and then exploring our options. That's about a quarter of you.
Interesting. Yeah, many start with one flow, so one API flow, and thanks to your answers really help us pick the right depth for the case studies. So moving on to the case study, El Paso Electric. So we connected Kyriba to Oracle Cloud using API for cash accounting. And design highlight canonical mapping across systems, shared error taxonomy, and idempotency with safe retries. And what was the outcome? Faster cache positioning and stronger forecasting signal with less manual effort. So in real time, the GL entries would post from the TMS, from Kyriba, to Oracle using the API connectivity. And moreover, the chart of accounts was synchronized between Oracle Cloud and Kyriba using the API. Now for Metro Nashville, we implemented JP Morgan payments API via Kyriba for wires. And I'm proud to say that Elire is the first Kyriba partner to implement API wires for JP Morgan. So we used entitlements and approvals in Kyriba. So Kyriba workflow and has 9 levels of approvals, 3 levels on the transfer level, 3 levels on the batch level, and 3 levels on the file level. So we implemented approvals in Kyriba, idempotent request, and bank callbacks with immediate accepted, posted, and rejected status from JP Morgan. So as soon as the file goes out, as soon as the API, the transfer is run, you see the status on the track and info tab of the delivery, of the posting, of the rejection. And this is a great why, because reconciliation is driven from Kyriba with enriched reason codes, right? So let's say there is an error, there's an issue. there's a rejection. Immediately we see the rejection, immediately, and we are able to resolve that rejection. So what's the outcome of this? Fewer manual reconciliations and same-day visibility into settlements, and not just same day, same moment visibility into settlements. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about API versus SFTP. We know SFTP is a tried and true method. It's been the default, right, for a long time. But where does API shine? So API shines when immediacy and callbacks matter. So when you have high velocity payments and fine-grained entitlements, and when bank APIs are stable and well documented. For example, event-driven flows with retries and replays give resilience. So say you're sending a payment, a wire payment via API. You want that wire payment, this is a real-time gross settlement. You want it immediate and you want to know the status immediately. Right? Via API, that callback, that status is immediately available. Posted, rejected, or executed, immediately available. Versus SFTP, it's file-based, transfer-based, a few minutes. So API shines when immediacy and callbacks matter. Now, SFTP is not sunsetted yet. SFTP is still the right tool when batch windows are fine, right? When standard files meet the need, or when bank APIs are immature or are heavy rate limited. It's what SFTP is fast time to value for latency insensitive workloads. So how do you make the decision whether we should do API or SFTP? Use API where real time and callbacks create a business value. And then keep SFTP where batch is perfectly acceptable. But keep in mind, most programs, most projects end up hybrid, which is perfectly fine. Now you might ask, what about security? So think identity and channel. Identity and channel. By identity, where is that file coming from? Who is it coming from? The signature on the file itself. And channel is a transport channel. So with API, we have OAuth 2, which handles identity and tokens, and we have MTLS. What is MTLS? Mutual TLS. And for example, JP Morgan requires mutual TLS. What that is that both sides authenticate with certificates. Kariba has a private certificate and a public certificate, and JP Morgan has a private certificate and public certificate, and the public certificates are exchanged to one, sign the file and establish the connection. So what does this mean? Together, they secure sensitive flows like wires and cache data. So on top of that, you add idempotency keys and safe retries. You have dual approvals, multiple approval levels in the TMS, comprehensive logs and alerting, and a clear fallback plan. In addition to that, we operate API as if they're in testing, as if it's in the production system. What does that mean? We operate it with the same discipline, we implement with the same discipline as if it's in a live system. So we align services with the banks, respect rate limits and fallback, and we define incident runbooks and roadblocks. We monitor latency and error codes and callback SLAs. And we also manage versioning and change windows with discipline. So the API, as it's working in test, as it's implemented in test, we treat it with the same seriousness as we treat it in production. So it's a beautiful migration to production. Integration architecture. So here we show some preferred pathways between ERP, TMS, and banks. So for TMS and banks, connection between TMS and banks, we use API for initiation and status. What is initiation? Payment initiation, for example, right? A wire initiation. And for status, payment status, and of course, for what? For intraday activity. And we keep SFTP for end-of-day statements. When it's simpler or more mature. So if the bank is not ready or your bank is not ready, the API is not ready for the bank connection, then we do SFTP. Or if it's more cost-effective to do intradays via API and prior days via SFTP, that's the route to go. Now, for ERP and TMS, for connection between ERP and TMS, we use APIs where supported. And we keep SFTP for master data or GL when batch is a better fit. So for example, updating your core data, your accounts, your bank's information, that's daily process, right? And it can be event-driven once in the morning. Versus receiving a payment instructions from the ERP and sending a wire out, that you want it immediate. So these want to done via API. So event-driven designs with webhooks, retries, and an componency keep flows resilient. But always design fallbacks and circuit breakers in case an endpoint is unavailable. Now this table here, it summarizes when each approach fits, SFTP versus API. But it's not a one size fits all. Again, choose APIs when immediacy, callbacks, and fine-grained control drive value. And then choose SFTP where batch is sufficient. Latency is acceptable, for example, a priority file, or banks are not API ready. And most clients, in our experience, land in a hybrid model, mixing APIs and SFTP per flow. So for example, wires. Wires are real-time gross settlements, urgent, right? We want those sent via API. ACHs, they're low-value payments. Those can be sent via SFTP or API. They take a couple of days to settle. However, as most of you may know, there is same-day ACHs. If you send the ACH before the cutoff time, it will be processed same day. Now, with statements end of day, depending on your company size, you may receive one end of day statement for one region or multiple end of day statements for multiple regions. Now, if you're receiving one end of day statement once in the morning, completely fine to do via SFTP. But if you're receiving multiple statements and you have your cash position worksheet viewed by international, viewed across the board globally, then you want to make sure that those statements are received on time and immediately. So you want the end of day statement via API. Now for intraday statements are statements you receive during the day for transactions activity that occurs during the day. So intraday statements, you don't want to wait until noon or the afternoon to receive your intraday statement via SFTP. You want it immediately. You want to call on the API to retrieve your statement and see your cash position immediately, and you want that cash position to reconcile with your forecast. So with intraday, you want to have API. Payment status advices. You want to know the status of your payment immediately via API. You want to know if your payment rejected, so you can redo the payment. You can check the error and redo the payment. Not wait until the status comes back via SFTP. If it comes back via SFTP, and miss the cutoff time. So you want the status immediately. As soon as you send the payment via API, you get the status within seconds. FX trades and rates. For example, FX Sol, 360T, and rate files from Bloomberg. You are executing foreign exchange trades. So you want to lock in those rates immediately and execute the trade immediately for those rates. If you miss the time window, you miss the time window. So API is the way to go there. Now, GL and reference data, as we mentioned before, if it's referential data such as updated to the accounts or update to companies, bank setup, you can have that once a day. You can do that via SFTP. Or if you're connecting your TMS to an ERP and your team is constantly making updates in the ERP and you want those updates reflected in the TMS, then API is where to go. As soon as the update is made in the ERP, the TMS receives the update to via API. Same with GL. Some of our clients ask for one GL file a week. Some of them require once a day, and some of them need multiple GL files a day. So depending on your need, if you need multiple GL files per day and you want that redundancy check in place, API is the way to go. Now, bank readiness. What we look for when we are connecting to a bank or when we're migrating from SFTP to API, we make sure the bank can support OAuth 2, can support MTLS, token life cycles and scopes, webhooks, SLAs, sandbox parity with production, so we can test, regression test before moving on to production. We decide the rate limits, the error code taxonomy, the definitions of the error codes, documentation, and version policy. We form the cutover support and the contact paths. Now, what are the benefits of API? Benefits of API, straight through processing, STP, of 90% for wires, right? What does that mean? At least 95% of your wires are executed successfully immediately after generation from the TMS or from your ERP, straight through processed. No rejections and immediate status updates. How is that beneficial? It's beneficial because it reduces the reconciliation time from hours to minutes. Within minutes, you'll know the status of the payment, you'll have that forecast. It broadens the intraday balance coverage. You receive that intraday immediately showing for example, 495 BI code hit in your bank account, being debited from the bank account immediately and reflected on your cash position. So it broadens the intraday balance coverage and improves forecasting error. So the time to detect and the time to resolve is shortened exponentially. And of course, with financials, you can view your liquidity in real time and invest the idle cash, working capital, and also for bank fees, you can see the anomalies in real time. So essentially, you're lowering time to detect and you're resolving issues. Now, what about cutover and rollback? Because we know every project, every change comes with some sort of risk, right? So what can be done in order to avoid or reduce risk as much as possible? So we dry run and run in parallel before cutover. Okay. We set clear go, no go gates. If needed, we roll back to SFTP or manual paths, with preserved idempotency keys so we avoid duplicates. And then war room comms and bank change windows are set in advance. So preparation, preparation, preparation. And with that, I'll bring Valentin back in for OIC and the SNRL piece. Valentin?
Thanks, Adele. Yeah, so I quickly talked about it, that this would be kind of my sample, and this would be a case of OIC in action. And at SRNL, we leverage it for both the staged files that might be picked up from a B2B interaction or just from an FTP server and processed through to the Fusion HCM and ERP system. And we have a number of integrations. Number was within the 50s easily. And it was a hybrid blend, like Adele mentioned. Like, there's some use cases where it just needs to be a file that needs to be picked up monthly or weekly and processed, so there's no immediacy. But of course, there were, integrations within OIC for SNR that needed that immediacy, so we definitely went to the API route. So a few things to consider, and this is just general, that OIC is fantastic. It's great for noticing events like from an Atom feed coming from Fusion, being able to schedule these integrations, be them API based or file based, and being able to also act as an endpoint itself. So if you are trying to hit an integration from a third party because you have something within the Oracle ecosystem that you're trying to automate and feed data to, you can actually set up OIC as a listening endpoint as well. So those were the huge things. Now, there's some new capabilities we also leveraged because this was OIC Gen 3, and Gen 3 came about kind of about a year and a half ago, I want to say, to 2 years ago was when Gen 3 was released. And it itself brought new capabilities with projects, so being able to subdivide specific business units into their own projects so they're easier to manage, easier to monitor. Monitoring is a huge event. Abdel mentioned it earlier, being able to see which of your integrations have failed, which ones have thrown out some lines, but overall succeeded. All of that orchestration that needs to happen for any of these integrations, finding a good framework that works really well and is able to structure all of those from the high level down to the mapper itself is critical. And we choose OIC for that purpose. It's a relatively inexpensive service within OCI to be able to do that. It's got all the security layers that most of your systems that are already OCI on are leveraging. And the Gen 3 over the last year has introduced a lot of features. I mentioned the RPA one, which is a huge one, having that ability to automate things right from an integration system. The ability to leverage lookups as well. So instead of hard coding mappings, right, the vendor from the API or from a file sends you a certain set of codes, those translate to specific element entries, for example, in Fusion. You need a way to map those. And for a lot of the time, at a lot of integrations over the years, what people do is they will just map it down into the XML level, down into the actual hard code itself. But OIC has a lot of these elements that can actually be broken out from the integration so that they can be managed easier. Lookups are one of them. So if you have a lookup value from the vendor, a lookup value for element entry, and maybe a third or fourth dimension to that table, that can actually be extracted, updated by the functional user, whereas your integration continues living and referencing and calling that lookup table effectively, right? So that being able to call sub-integrations. OIC is also really good at fault handling. So if the vendor had sent some bad data that your system does not accept, you can actually build a lot of those fault tolerances and fault catching within the integration itself. So when it does send you an array of data in the payload and it's incorrect, or certain dollar signs are not supposed to be in the value column, or O is a 0, right? Things like that can be caught within the integration so that it doesn't even raise an error to have human intervention. So there's a lot of these processes, self-healing, self-analysis processes that you can code within OIC, and we try to do that as much as possible. A lot of the orchestration, again, is from scheduled, so the files that are picked up and processed. Notifications are also sent through OIC, so maybe there's a failed line and a specific SME needs to access that data. You can actually send them the notification email right from OIC that, hey, these lines failed, go and inspect these person numbers. For these element entries, something went wrong. Something is wrong with their effective date. They might be terminated already, in an inactive status. So the HDL load stops that inaction and you need to just go and verify. So OIC can orchestrate all of that in a very, very simple and nice GUI way as well. So you can see each of the steps as in little, card regions, the interconnections, the loops that are all around. It's not just buried in code. They've tried to make it as user-friendly and GUI-friendly as possible. Some key risks and kind of controls from this SRNL and things we've just learned is that the vendors themselves are not, they're not perfect. They're going to skip and miss file dates, send dates, right? If it is one of these scheduled files, they might send bad data in these. So you have to kind of think about these bad situations. They might forget to send the data, or based on your schedule, if your scheduler is not exact, you might hit a Monday that's an off day for the vendor, so the vendor doesn't send the file, even though you're waiting for it because you run payroll on a Tuesday. So you kind of have to think about these situations and have a plan forward and almost look at your calendar ahead of where these scheduled dates hit specific times so you don't get into these issues. So we run across that as well. And offset holidays, exactly. Yeah, and making sure that's the one thing we've kind of noticed is even after going live and being successful with OIC, that we still had to go and tweak these. Maybe the client themselves wanted additional data points that they could cross-reference with their records. They wanted notifications at different points of it. So make your integration, of course, as fluid as possible with good documentation, a good design doc beforehand. Make sure you gather all your requirements for that integration and try to use APIs wherever possible. So if Fusion itself or PeopleSoft has an API available, leverage that and instead of trying to figure out an entire payload structure and building a file, try to leverage these APIs that are already exposed. And Fusion has a ton exposed, both on the ERP and HCM side. So one little quick use case of APIs in action, and they can be used in any facet to trigger, to listen to an API call, to schedule files and transfer them through the system, which then can call an API. The mixing and matching is next level with OIC. So give that a shot. But hopefully that was a good use case for OIC at SRNL for you guys. Adele, I'll pass it back to you, Lloyd.
Thank you, Valentin. That was actually excellent because it really complements what we were talking about here with the control and mitigating risk. So you mitigated risk during the OIC implementation of SRNL with your checks, notifications, and escalations, right? So this Oracle example is excellent. So APIs reduce uncertainty, right? And I love the fact that you touched on the point where the integration is pre-built. So there are pre-built templates already for the API. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the B2B feature within OIC, it's something that's come about within the last year as well. And you effectively have all your EDI schemas ready to go. You literally go to your schema, select, okay, I want this EDI, 4010, and I am 850, PO, or 834 benefits in status. And it's got the entire structure of the integration, the payload, all the loops within it, all the required fields, not required. And you can, of course, manipulate schemas if you wanted to, but you can quickly spin it up, tie it to a document, tie it to a trading compartment, which actually would effectively creates the integration for you to a certain point. You still have to feed it the data, but it's much faster implementations of these integrations, and spinning them up is much easier nowadays than having to design everything from the ground up, from scratch effectively. So, and there's pre-built connectors too. So if you're trying to connect to a system that nobody's even heard of, there's hundreds of OIC connectors that are ready to go. And the connector is effectively the connection that you'll need to call. So you kind of specify the authentication, the endpoint, but the adapters, of course, take care of the intricacies. So if it's a JDBC connection, the intricacies in there, you just fill out your credentials, what a database you're hitting, and the JDBC connection goes off. If it's an agent and you're calling something on premise, you just tell it the credentials, and the agent knows how to take care of the nuances for that specific application or connection, FTP, you name it. All of those already exist within OIC. So,
yeah, so that sounds like it reduces both implementation time and cost, because time is money, right?
Yeah, it does. And on the flip side, after the implementation, the observability capabilities within ORC are great. So being able to look at all of your integrations on one page and how many times they've run, right? How many fails, passes, and then you can drill down through those failures, see the instances that failed, and then track down, okay, why did this one fail? Why did the fault handler get triggered on this one? So just the way that they've structured everything is just very intelligently done, which I really appreciate.
Taxonomy of error codes.
Yeah, error codes, and it'll tell you. I mean, if you're tracing this to the granular level, it'll tell you down to the payload and line exactly when it failed, why it failed, timings, and then you can of course rerun instances. If you've planned ahead and thought about replicating duplicate data in your system, you gotta of course think about that. But it all starts with the planning and kind of requirements gathering at the beginning, like you mentioned. So very important.
Absolutely. And I was taken aback the first time I saw a response payload for API because of how detailed the error was. And yeah, it gave the account number is not set up for payments. Basically, not just the SFTP error usually says error 700, error 10061, right? But instantly, even without waiting for basically an SFTP acknowledgement to come back, the response payload shows the error, so you can mitigate them and resolve immediately. So it's really cool. Thank you, Valentin. Okay, so for this slide, I'm gonna just talk about the flow of the API event flow of the JP Morgan wires that we implemented. So the first step 1, you initiate the payment from Kyriba. Okay, you initiate the payment from Kyriba. Now, depending on your approval workflow, that payment will be either in status registered, ready to send, or it'll be in status to be signed, right? To be signed based on the approval workflow. And in addition to approval workflow, you can have approval classes. So let's say you have one group in your team that handles level 1 payments and another group that handles level 1 and level 2 payments. You can set an approval class for the first group that in totality they can only approve up to, let's say, 100K, and individually they can approve 100K. But it means that if one person approves 100K, that means that approval class already used up their 100K and the other group has to approve, right? So first step is initiation, initiate the wire in Kyriba. And approval, if you have the approval process on. And immediately after payment is released to the bank acknowledges the payment. So you get the delivery status saying that was delivered to the bank. So you know the request was received. There is no waiting to see if an acknowledgement comes back. Via SFTP, and I'm not hating on SFTP. SFTP is tried and true, but you send the payment and you have to wait for the acknowledgement to be staged by a bank in the folder and wait for the file to be pulled into the TMS and for the payment status to be updated. But with API, you know the file is delivered right away. So the bank acknowledges it immediately, so you know the request was received. Step 3, Callbacks come from the bank with real-time statuses, whether it was accepted, posted, rejected. And as Valentin mentioned, the error taxonomy is very detailed. And how does this benefit us? How does this benefit anyone? Because it keeps reconciliation inside the TMS, current and audit ready without manual chasing. No need to email the bank. No need to call the bank to find out if the payment went through. You know immediately, so you get full transparency. So this keeps reconciliation inside the TMS, current and audit ready without manual chasing. And the takeaway is that API reduces uncertainty. It eliminates guesswork and speeds up treasury operations. I'll hand over to Maddie for poll question 3.
You should see on your screen and in the chat our third poll question. What are the biggest challenges you face with treasury integration today? Responses could be lack of visibility, manual reconciliation, ERP and TMS complexity, security and compliance, or other. We'll give folks another couple seconds to get their responses in. Looks like we have about 50 responses so far. With ERP and TMS complexity leading the way with 35% of responses, saying that the biggest challenge they face is complexity with ERPs and TMS.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. So I was thinking that would be one of the first. With I was thinking security and compliance would be a top one. ERP and bank complexity and visibility are usually at the top of the list, but it's definitely understandable that ERP and bank complexity, because API is new, right? And you need a trusted partner implementer to implement it for you and to teach you how to read the messages, how to resolve the issues. The great thing about it is that when I say resolve the issues, they're human readable when it comes to the API. So there's a very small learning curve to it. And in regards to implementation, a partner like Elire can implement it end to end for you. And when you implement it for your ERP or TMS, we handle all of the connectivity. So it takes out the complexity, and we implement using the methodology I mentioned before. But your inputs help us focus the close. I do. So what are the key takeaways? Scope for value without overbuilding. So business need, business value. Is there going to be a value to the treasury team knowing that, or the AP team, or any team that generates the payments in your company, knowing that their payments were successful immediately in real time? Is there any benefits of your team knowing their cash position, their intraday cash position, right, their immediate cash position immediately, along with all of their other types of liquidity, for example, their deal capture debt instruments, lines of credit immediately via API to make decisions? Or is waiting until the next day for prior day statements acceptable, right? So scope for value without overbuilding. And get authentication and entitlements right. So authentication and entitlements right. And plan cutover and rollbacks deliberately. Okay. So a regression plan, a testing plan, sign-off phases, go, no go. And of course, choose API versus SFTP per flow, and be comfortable operating in hybrid. Completely fine operating in hybrid. Clients now, and they have SFTP for priority statements, and API for wires and intraday statements. And it's more cost effective and works out great for them. And measure success with a few simple KPIs. So I'm happy to take questions if we're not short on time.
Yeah, I think there was a question in the Q&A. This is toward the beginning of the presentation, but for JPM payment APIs, were they for global accounts or only US accounts?
So for JPM wires, they were for domestic wires. However, the implementation, the payment format that's being implemented also supports cross-border wires. So it is compatible with cross-border wires as well. And cross-border wires from other than the US debiting accounts.
If you have other questions, submit those to the Q&A. Otherwise, you can reach out to ETE2025@elire.com, and I can direct you to the person who can answer any questions that you've had from any of the 4 sessions we've had today during the Elire Treasury Experience.